It's just the Silver Vibe right on the end in the parking lot. I'm going to start, I think. I'm Marlene Ersman. We're having technological issues here. Turns out that she's going to go get my laptop and see if it works better on that laptop. My name is Marlene Ersman, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Iowa Wildlife Center. We're located right now in Ames, downtown Ames, in a small office. We own 75 acres of land near the Ledges State Park. And we are building our wildlife rehabilitation, conservation education, and wildlife assistance skills training center there. So we're in process, but the land is owned by us, and we have a conservation easement on it with the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, which means that no matter what happens to our organization, should horribly it fold in the future, that land will be protected because it's wonderful wetland, savanna, and woodland and grassland system. We'll be restoring about 30 acres of natural prairie to the area next fall. So right now, part of it's in corn and soybeans, preparing the soil to accept the prairie seed. So it's going to be a really neat place to come. And so I hope at some point, when we have our events over on Wildway, which is what we call our land, you'll be able to come over and see us over there. But today you wanted to hear about, you know what I'm going to talk about?
Bats.
Bats, exactly. That's right. Good job. So how many of you have seen bats in the wild? Yeah. How many of you have seen bats in your homes? Oh, see, yes. So I'm going to talk to you. The slide program goes through how we take care of them, as well as the different species of bats we have here in Iowa. So I hope we can get that going. But in the meantime, I want to tell you that bats are really cool critters. Okay, I brought a live one with me. Do you want to see it now? Yeah, sure. While we're hanging out? Okay. So we have 7 species of bats that inhabit Iowa. Very little is known about most of those species because where do they spend most of their time?
In the tree.
In the tree, flying in the air, in caves. It depends on the type of bat it is. It depends on the species. Exactly right. Well, it's little and it's brown.
Is he friendly?
No. Well, he's a wild animal, so I'm going to hold it. He won't, so he's not going to get loose. I'll come around. He's one of our smallest bats. Say what?
Will we be able to touch it?
No, nope. No. Just remember, he just asked if you'd be able to touch it. And no, I wear leather gloves when I handle these wild animals. And because you just never know, they can get frightened and bite us no matter how much they're used to being handled. We have special permits that allow us to have non-releasable animals to use as education animals. So this is a little brown bat. Did you find my laptop?
I did, but it's working on ours now. So.
Figures. Well, we're going to be good. But you, yeah, you did. We were hovering too much.
That happens in our school all the time.
Yeah, IT is like, oh, it's a magic place. Okay, I'm going to bring out the bat anyway, okay? And then we'll do the program. So this is a little brown bat. It's one of our smallest bats. How many of you've held a penny and a nickel, right? Put those together, and that's what this bat weighs. It only weighs about 8 grams. And it's tiny. Now, we don't get very many little brown bats in. We usually get big brown bats. And they're the ones that probably are in your homes when you see them. And big brown bats weigh, maybe 17 grams, so not much bigger. They're still only about this big. Their wingspan looks big when they're flying in your house, right? But they're still tiny animals. And their bones are really fragile. And so learning how to respect them and get them out of your homes is a really good thing to know. And in the spring, summer, and fall, warm weather like this, if they're in your homes, you can just open up all your doors and windows if you can, get the screens off if you can, but usually just the doors is enough. They feel that air current and they follow the air current outside. So you would want to shut all the doors into bedrooms and things like that, but make sure that they've got this alley outside, and they usually find it on their own. In the wintertime, they won't survive outside. In fact, the membranes of their wings and their tails get frostbite pretty easily. So that's when we say, call us. If you can capture it safely, using leather gloves, a towel, carefully because they're fragile, putting it in a cardboard box and sealing the box up, and then you can get it to us. And sometimes there are other people around, like your animal control or sometimes nice naturalists or something, but can help talk you through how to remove the bat. But always feel free to give us a call, and that's what we're here for. I have a few brochures for you to take if you're interested. And I will say before I forget that on Friday, November 10th from 6:30 to 9:30 at the Raccoon River Park Nature Lodge in West Des Moines, we're having our first Gala Fundraiser. Everything we do with animals is really expensive. They take special formula to raise them. They take special permits to have them. They take special caging, depending on the species. And we just built, with the help of volunteers and some donors, 3 big cages. They're called pre-release conditioning cages that we were able to put first a litter of possums in to exercise, and then we released them. And then we put a litter of skunks that we raised in there. I love skunks. They are the sweetest animal. The smell, we could get off on lots of different things, but I will tell you, all these animals warn us, and skunks are the best at warning us when we're invading their space. So they'll arch their tail and get it all fizzed out, and then they'll stamp their front feet. And then if you're still in their space, they can whip around so fast and point their little behind at you and spray that stinky smell, right? And so the thing with skunks is that you move really slow and you speak quietly and you let them know that you're there. And if you can and aren't too terrified, you just stand still, and they just come up and amble on their way. They don't want to use that spray. You're bigger than they are. They're just scared and trying to warn you away. So learning how to behave around all these different animals is fascinating, and it makes our natural world even more interesting because we can interact with these animals safely. We can observe them from a distance and be really calm and quiet around them. So I'm going to ask you to be calm and quiet around this little bat that I'm going to bring out. We don't name our education animals. I don't. Some of our volunteers have names for them. Did you know that bats are the only flying mammal in the world? That's pretty special. Mm-hmm. Yep. So you know what a flying squirrel really does? Do they really fly?
No.
They glide, right. Yep, so these are the only flying mammal in the world. And he's so little, I don't know where he went. There he is. And if you're really quiet, you'll be able to hear it. I'm going to start here, and then I'm just going to come around. At the front, he's got his wings are folded up against him, and he's got this little pointy thing. That's his thumb. Their wings are really hands. You see his mouth kind of going, and if you listen carefully, you can hear him going. He's kind of making a clicking noise, and that's just warning us. That's one of his warning or her warning signs that she's not happy. She's afraid. Isn't she cute?
Just had a bat in my house.
And if we don't understand things, we tend to be afraid of them, right? So the more I handle different species of animals, the less afraid I am. I start learning about their natural history. I don't know. You can usually, it's got really sharp teeth, which means it's probably a pretty young one. Because the older they are, of course, the more worn their teeth are. Just like people. So there, now you've seen a bat up close and personal. So now we're going to get into this, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I really wanted you to see a live bat. And remember what species is it? It's a special kind of brown bat. Little brown bat, right. Okay, so this is a real baby bat. This is a baby big brown bat. They come in, they're naked. Bats typically have one pup a year. Some of the species have up to 4 at a time, but only once a year. So they don't just keep having them like rodents do. They're not rodents. They're very special animals. So we have to give it special formula, and it's sucking from a special sponge. And we weigh them, see it only weighs 5 grams, so a baby big brown bat weighs just a little less than this full-grown little brown bat. And so these are orphaned red bat pups. I just wanted to show you some of the species that we get in. And their mother was grounded. The red bats are tree bats. They roost in trees. The little brown bat and the big brown bat roost in caves. Little red bats don't live in big colonies like the little brown bat. They live by themselves in treetops, in the foliage. And when the mother gives birth, she does it all by herself, and she has up to 4 pups that she carries with her as she goes and feeds. These pups have special teeth that allow them to attach to her, and their feet, everything about them is designed to cling to whatever surface they're on, including their mother. And they're one of my favorite species. They're just beautiful. And so here I am feeding one of the bat pups out of a syringe. It's graduated from the foam applicator to a syringe now. It's learning how to lick the formula. And there now it's graduated to a mixture of blended mealworms to formula. We've blended it all together, so they're learning to eat those chunks of mealworms, trying to get it used to insects. And then now it's outside learning they exercise their wings, just like baby birds do, before releasing them. So we've got special houses. We keep them in soft-sided containers like this. Those are butterfly rearing huts. And so we've got some, over the years, I've had some in my den. That's why I wanted to develop this center, because my house is no longer big enough for some of these animals. So we've had them in our den, in our basement. Our basement's unheated, so we can actually hibernate them down there. They hibernate right. 40 degrees is a really good temperature for bats, so your attics are probably pretty good spots for them until it gets too cold. And then they start coming down into your living areas to try and find a little bit warmer spot to spend the winter. And then in the spring, I'll put them on my back porch, and they'll start to wake up then with the warming temperatures, and then we start feeding them again. And then we put them in big flight tents to give them exercise before we release them. And that's what we want to see. We put them on trees. They can crawl right up the tree. You see the bat?
Yeah.
So it crawled up the tree to get some height, and then it spreads its wings and drops down and flies away. And again, we do a lot of educational programs. We had the Year of the Bat celebration. Kids made lots of cool masks, gave lots of really wonderful programs. And they come from all over central Iowa and even beyond central Iowa. People will drive great distances to bring bats to us. And so we always want to make sure that people are safe, the bat is safe. Sometimes we have volunteer rescuers or transporters to get them to us. And then we also provide people with bat exclusion tips, how to keep them out of your house in the first place, finding where they're coming in, plugging the holes without trapping the bats in the attic. We have admission forms. This is a big brown bat, I think. Nope, that's a silver-haired bat, sorry, one of our neat species. And they come in with lots of different problems. So you can see this arrow, can you see what, how do I, up there. What does that look like? A hole. They come in with damaged wings. So sometimes if they're in our attics, they get punctured by roofing nails that are sticking through. They can get in a fight with other bats. They can get caught by cats. And those holes can heal, which is really nice. But they also come in with, see all these spots here? Do you know what those are? They're parasites. Yeah, they get mites too. And so we treat those just like you treat your dogs and cats for fleas and ticks. We treat the bats with a dilute solution of the same stuff. So this is a bat that actually was caught by a cat. And you can see that the entire wing is missing. That won't heal. So then, no, we can't replace it. Nobody's ever figured out how to suture a new membrane on there. So then we have to figure out what to do with them. And sadly, one thing that rehabilitators are faced with all the time is euthanizing, giving something a humane death, saving it from pain. And so this particular one, we sadly had to do that. But those are tough decisions we have to make all the time. This is what parasites can do. It can actually cause the fur to completely fall off. So this is an interesting case. This is a barn down near Winterset, Iowa. Someone called me and said, I've got lots of babies that are on the floor and they're dead and dying. So I went down there, and up in the rafters, I looked up the very peak of the barn, and all these rafters. Can you see what's in here? It's just packed with bats, and they're all big brown bats. They love being tight together like that. And there were hundreds of female bats that had been using this barn as a maternal colony. They all give birth at the same time and raise their pups together. So we rigged up this, so when the babies accidentally got jostled and fell to the barn loft floor, they would be crawling around and actually could find these on either end of the barn and get up as high as they could. And the mothers did continue to take care of them. The mothers wouldn't go to the barn floor, but if the babies crawled up high enough, the mothers would take care of them. But it didn't save all of these babies. It's kind of hard to see in this light, but that help? Yeah. So that's like 30 baby big brown bats. And so we have to make sure that they're all fed the right food and rehydrated with water and electrolytes because they've been without their moms for a long time. So here's some of the basics. That's a cool bat. We don't have this species in Iowa. Look at the nose. I think it's called a leaf nose bat. So he's got this big piece of its nose up there, kind of like a proboscis. Yeah, I think it's a leaf-nosed bat. So it's the only mammal capable of true flight, remember? Over 1,000 species of bats in the world. Over 20% of all mammals is a bat of some kind. So how many species do we have in Iowa? Do you remember what I said? Well, we have 9 well, I did, but I was wrong. So numbers and so 9 are regular residents. So remember 9. How many? 9. Yeah, okay. 2 more are rare visitors, and you'll get to see pictures of each one of them. 2. All right, so which other mammals are closest relative? The mammoth? Not squirrel, because squirrel's in the rodent family. This is going to be interesting. A shrew. Now you think about it, a shrew isn't a rodent either. It's an insect-eating mammal. So it's more related to bats than to rodents. So people always ask me about rabies. Do bats get rabies? Yeah. Do mammals get rabies? Yeah. Our dogs would get rabies. Our cats would get rabies if we didn't vaccinate them, right? So these wild animals out there don't have the care of veterinarians or people like you all to make sure that they get their vaccinations. And so they do get rabies, but it's not as common as you might think. Far less than 1% of any wild population of mammal would get rabies. So this is just an example. Back in 2014, there were 487 bats submitted for rabies testing. People found them in their homes, and so they just would take them to make sure they weren't rabid. Only 10 were rabid. So that's not very many. Skunks, 7 were tested, 2 had rabies. Cats, 366 were tested, 1 had rabies. Cows, this is interesting, 82 cows were tested, only 2 had rabies. To test an animal for rabies, you have to euthanize it. You have to kill it because they use the brain to test for the rabies prions, they're called. So you can see that there's not very many rabid animals out there. A lot of them have distemper or otherwise have other illnesses, but that doesn't mean you should just always think that they're not rabid, because rabies, if you get it, just like any of these animals, you die. I think there's just a couple of cases ever been documented where humans have pulled through rabies. So it's something to be respected, but not feared, okay? So that's another way we can understand these animals out there. All right, more back on the bases. Small size, big impact on the ecosystems. They're a major predator of insects, so they should be called friend to farmers and friend to gardeners, and friend to those of us who don't like insects in our homes. They're important, some of the species, not the ones we have here, but some of the species in other parts of the country are important pollinators because they like to get into the flower and sip the nectar. Just like bumblebees. The pollen will get on the backs of the bats. The bat will go to another flower to drink the nectar and pollinate that flower. So they're important pollinators. Okay. And in some parts of the world, they're fruit eaters. And so they're really important to disperse seeds because they eat the fruit that has seeds in it, and then they fly away, and then they poop out the seeds, in a different place, and then that plant, that tree, that bush will grow from there. All right. Remember I said they have their wings are really their hands? Yeah. And you can see the tiny bones in this bat's wings, and you can see all the veins and everything. So that's how our bats are connected together with those membranes. The tail is connected to the hind legs, and the hind legs are connected to the forearm by another membrane. That's the wing. Isn't that cool? Yeah, that's cool. In fact, their order is Chiroptera, which means hand wing. If you look at the taxonomic chart, you've got genus and species, but you've also got family and all that. But the order is Chiroptera, which means hand wing. All right. And these are just different species. They're just variations of bats. And so you can see here, it doesn't have a tail or any membrane connecting the 2 hind legs. And he's sticking his tongue out at you, by the way. So that would be one of the fruit eaters. This is a free-tailed bat. You can see that long tail here, but it doesn't have a big membrane that connects to the hind feet. And then in the top one, you can see that it does have a big tail membrane, but look at those ears. Aren't those cool?
Looks like a bunny rabbit.
I know, they're huge. All right, so there are 5 species that migrate here from Iowa to warmer climates or caves, and 4 species hibernate pretty locally here. And I mentioned that 40 degrees was about the perfect temperature. That's pretty much cave temperature. Their bodies slow way down. Their heart rate slows way down. Everything drops way down so they don't have to eat. That's how they reserve their energy. Little brown bats, like what did I just show you? Little brown bat. They can hibernate over 9 months. So they eat lots of insects before they go into hibernation, and then they can hibernate for like 9 months. It's a long time. So what are big browns doing? We kind of talked about that, right? They're sometimes in our attics. So here's the big brown bat, the common big guy we have here. Yeah, he's just, remember how they sort of sense their environment by emitting noise? So he's just sort of sniffing and emitting noise and setting what he, yeah, and look at this. There's his thumb right there. So they eat beetles, including lots of agricultural pests, and they're found in lots of different habitats. There's a little brown bat, like I just showed you, found across the eastern U.S. and all of Iowa, and it's most common near water. Look at how it's packed in there. Those are all bats. They like to be tight like that. Yep, they do. They like to be really warm. And so when you put up bat boxes, location is critical for them because they like it warm. Yeah, well, there's lots of good information out there. So here's an Indiana bat. It's federally endangered. It inhabits upland and riparian forests. That means forests near streams and rivers. And it needs standing dead trees. And what do we do when a tree dies, usually? We cut it down. Dead trees are so important to so many animals, but some of these bats really depend on them. And in Iowa, they're usually found south of Interstate 80, so Des Moines and on south. Yes, sir? Okay. Just making sure everyone's okay. And then they hibernate in caves. Remember I said some live in trees? This one is one of the cave dwellers. Here's the northern long-eared bat. It was recently just considered federally threatened. So it's found across the eastern and northern U.S. It eats lots of insects and spiders. And it often feeds by gleaning, which means it'll crawl around trees and glean insects from tree bark and tree leaves, and it'll glean from the leaf litter on the forest floor too. Here's the eastern red bat. Remember I showed you that cluster of babies, pups? One of my favorite species. They're gorgeous, and they have more hair, more fur on their bodies than a lot of our other bats, which allows them to tolerate cold better. So they're one of the last to migrate out of Iowa in the fall and one of the earliest to arrive then in the spring. And it feeds mostly on moths, so soft-bodied insects, not hard June bugs or anything. Here's an awesome bat. We've only gotten a couple of these in, but they're one of our bigger bats. It's called the hoary bat. Look how beautiful that is. He's got gorgeous fur. And she'll have 1 or 2 pups too. She can have a couple of pups. The silver-haired bat's another lovely one. We don't know much about a lot of these species, and this is one of the species we don't know a whole lot about. The tricolored bat, it's usually found near water, near rocky outcrops. So you think about the northeast Iowa with all the limestone outcrops and things.
Kind of looks like a lion with all the bigger portion of the mane.
Yeah, they have kind of a ruff around here. Yeah, some of them do, absolutely right. Good observation. And this is the evening bat. And they're really kind of hard to identify. You get them all in your hands and you go, what species is this? Some of them have hairy toes. Ha! Some of them, you measure their length of their forearm to figure out what they are. You weigh them. You look at their teeth. So some of them have different numbers of teeth. These roost in woodpecker holes and knot holes. So going back to dead and dying trees, this is another bat that would benefit from us not being so tidy. So here are the ones that don't usually come into Iowa, but once in a while do. You've got the Mexican free-tailed bat. We talked about that. They're both free-tailed. One's Mexican and one's the big free-tail. Look at how long his tail is, and it doesn't have a membrane connecting it to the hind legs. So here's something that is really important. It's called white-nose fungus. How many of you have heard of that? Anybody? White-nose fungus was first found in 2006. So what, 11 years ago? That's right. You're good at math. You should come and work for me.
Oh, no, no.
So what happens is that the fungus resides on the membranes around their nose and on their wings and their tail, and it interrupts their hibernation. It irritates them, and they rouse from hibernation. And when they rouse from hibernation, they use up all that energy that they stored going into hibernation. So a lot of them don't survive the winter that way. More than half of the U.S. bat species live in caves here in this country, and the white-nosed fungus affects cave-dwelling species, okay? So the bats that I said lived in treetops aren't affected by white-nose syndrome. It's the fungus, it's the cave-dwelling bats that are affected because that fungus loves cool and damp. That's a cave. So here in Iowa, it's had the strongest impact on little browns, northern long-eared, and tricolored bats. So these guys have been hit pretty hard.
What colors are the tricolored?
They're sort of they're a blend of like reds and browns. So they're really pretty. So we don't know really how this is going to impact them overall. Some of these bats will probably become extinct. At least one of the, like the Indiana bat, will probably, they're thinking it'll probably go extinct. 90 to 100% mortality. 90 to 100% of the bats in caves can die from this. That almost all of them are wiped out by this fungus. And they think that the bats, the fungus came over, you know what it's like to go exploring caves? Okay, so you go into a cave and you're wandering around and your boots are collecting whatever's in the cave that you're walking on. If fungus is in there, the spores are kind of flying around in the air, landing on your clothes. And so they think that cavers, people who like to explore caves, brought it back from Europe, where bats had evolved with it. So bats aren't affected by it over in Europe like they are here. It was a new thing for our bats, and they just couldn't cope with it. So over 6 million bats have died from this disease. So if all these bats are dying, we don't know how that's going to affect some of our ecosystems. So we just don't know. It's really pretty sad. So here's where it started. This was back in 2012. I didn't start it all the way back. But in 2012, you can see on the East Coast, it hadn't yet hit Wisconsin or Illinois. And this is in 2014. You can see that it's hit Missouri, parts of Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin. 2015, it's getting worse. It's spreading further, and this is the 2016, I believe. Yeah, and so you can see that it's all the way, it's spreading across our country, and there's even some up in Washington State. So general threats: habitat loss, pesticide use. They eat insects. They're eating the pests, but they also can be impacted by the spraying of pesticides because they groom themselves like kittens.
How come there are no bats on the west side of the
There are bats there, definitely, but the white-nose fungus has not spread that far yet. There hasn't been any deaths caused by the white-nose fungus in the western states yet, except Washington State. Wind turbines have been a problem for our bats, and so now they're trying to figure out how to put, what do I want to say? It's like a gizmo that emits sonar sounds, so the bats will avoid that and know that the wind turbines are there. They can't sense the wind turbines because they're going so fast. They look like they're going slow to us, but they're really going fast. And then our disturbance of winter roost sites, like caves, and loss and disturbance of maternal roost sites. So here's some of the general management. Maintain those large trees with loose bark, like hickory trees. That's like bat condos. They like to get in underneath the loose bark of hickory trees. Maintain large trees with cavities, and those old ugly snag trees that people are always wanting to cut down. I love snag trees. Be careful about how we impact riparian or creek areas. Maintain lots of native grasses and flowers and shrubs because that helps the insect communities, and the bats need the insects. That's right. And then here's some specific things. For some of the bats, like the endangered Indiana bat and the threatened long-eared bat, the Department of Transportation is proposing to change tree removal in some of its mitigation areas. So people are starting to catch on that these trees should not always be cut out to help protect the bats. And especially between October and March, that's when the bats are hibernating. So that's when you cut the trees down. But otherwise, they're using those trees. So I'm not going to go into this, but somebody was talking about putting up their bat houses. They should be installed as, in certain places. They should be installed at certain times. And just because you put up a bat house doesn't mean the bat will find it. So sometimes it takes a long time for the bats to find it, and sometimes it's just in the wrong location. So we can advise on that if you're interested. And so here are just some models of different bat houses. And so for the bats that like to live in caves, like the big brown and little browns, you can see that you could get lots of bats tucking up, snuggling together in all of these crevices. And so just lots of different ways to provide homes for bats. And there. That's like a maternal colony. It's a huge box. And it's got hundreds of bats in it. And you notice on the other side of the pole is a second house. So they can switch. If it gets too hot or too cold, they can go back and forth depending on the temperature. Just some ways to install bat boxes. And one important thing is to put something called a pup catcher under some of these, because when the mothers give birth, remember I talked about that barn where the pups drop to the barn loft floor? Those pup catchers catch the pups like a baseball glove, and it's made out of mesh so the pup can crawl right back up into the colony and reunite with the mother. Because there's lots of jostling and fighting that goes on in a bat colony. So that's a quick overview of bats and why they're beneficial, and they're not really creepy, are they? You think they're pretty cool? Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you tag bats to see if they migrate somewhere and then come back?
Some people have tagged them. It's kind of hard to tag a bat because often you're damaging the membrane. So they do have special tags. We don't do that. We let some of the other bat researchers. You know how have you set up mist nets for birds out here?
We have, well, not since I've been here.
Yeah. So I know a lot of bird researchers will set up these like finely meshed badminton nets, right? And they can catch birds that way. They ban the birds. And so you can do that with bats too. Just set up mist nets, we call them, at night. And when the bats come out to feed, you raise those nets up and the bats fly into them, and then you take them out and you measure them and identify them and band them if you want to. Yeah, good question.
Is there a particular place to put those bat houses that are better than other places?
There are, and it's usually, I can give you more information about that, but it's usually like on the south side and on the west side. You kind of want them to be warm. So, of a house or of your lot. That one on poles, it was just out in the middle of a prairie, So giving them lots of space and heat is good. Yep. Anything else?
Do bats like to go in the houses sometimes?
Sometimes bats like to go in our houses, which is why we put up their houses and to encourage them to go there. Bats can get into holes the size that a mouse can get into, right? Because they're tiny. So you got to find those holes and plug those up. You find every hole but the main hole. You plug everything up but one hole, and you let the bats escape. You put a special netting on the outside so they can crawl out of the attic, but they can't get back in.
How about outdoors? Do bats go outdoors sometimes?
Bats love to go outdoors because that's where their food is. You bet. That's where they can get exercise by flying, like you get exercise by walking. You eat your food. You had your lunch today. They go out and get their lunch by hunting insects at night.
How do they hunt during the nighttime hours?
Keep that button warm.
They actually use sonar. They can see pretty well. They can see, but they can really hear. So they emit a sound. It's like they go, oh, you want it? Let's do this. I'll demonstrate. I want one person over here to volunteer to be an ear. Somebody over here, raise your hand. I don't care. Okay. Okay, and somebody over here, raise your hand. Okay, you. I want you to close your eyes and don't open them until I say so. You're going to hear, and this is what I do for owls, and it's kind of similar. You're going to hear, you're going to be bat ears, so close your eyes. And then when I say to, I want you to point to where you hear this squeaking come from. Okay. Okay, now look, you both pointed right at me. Both ears knew exactly where that insect was. Or for an owl, it would be where the mouse was. So they emit a sound that bounces back off of the insect, and those ears can direct them right to the insect. So it's really cool. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any other questions? Yeah, some of the insects are like June beetle size, big guys, and some are just like mosquito size. They eat lots of different species of insects. Yep. Anything else? You all have been so great. I've really enjoyed this. So I'm sticking around for a little bit, but thank you so much for your attention and your great questions and your interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you.